expected. You know, President Trump saying again, not backing down really today, that his objection to NFL players kneeling during the national anthem was, quote, nothing to do with race. Tweeting that it's about respect for our country. And just hours before, on another hot button issue, another one, the White House announced a new policy banning most visitors from several countries, including ones in the original ban, with North Korea and Venezuela now added to the list, and Chad. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is covering all of it for us, and he joins us now live with more. Hi, John.
Heather, good morning to you. And the president all morning brushing off the pushback from the NFL over the weekend, insisting that players who take a knee during the national anthem should be disciplined by the league, tweeting out this morning the new hashtag, quote, stand for our anthem. There was a big show of defiance against the president yesterday. A lot of players took a knee during the anthem. Some teams, the Tennessee Titans, Seattle Seahawks, Pittsburgh Steelers, stayed in the locker room during the anthem, although one Pittsburgh player, you see there, Alejandro Villanueva, came out of the tunnel, put his hand in his heart and stood for the anthem. He, by the way, did 3 tours of duty as an Army Ranger in Afghanistan. This whole thing started on Friday night when the president said any player who kneels for the national anthem is an SOB who should be fired. Yesterday, on the way back to the White House from Bedminster, New Jersey, he stood by his comments.
With a hard-working. Well, I think the owners should do something about it. I think it's very disrespectful to our flag and to our country. So I certainly think the owners should do something about it. There was great solidarity. I watched a little bit. I was not watching the games today. Believe me, I'm doing other things. But I watched a little bit, and I will say that there was tremendous solidarity for our flag and for our country.
In an interview with Sports Illustrated magazine, the NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell said, quote, the way we reacted today and this weekend made me proud. I'm proud of our league. And talking about the protests on and off the field, they reflected the frustration, the disappointment of the players over the divisive rhetoric we heard from Trump. The president, or at least Roger Goodell, had some support from another member of the Players Association, Tom Brady, who stood for the anthem yesterday with his hand over his heart, though he was locking arms with another player. He said this morning on Boston radio station WEEI.
I certainly disagree with, what he said and thought it was just divisive.
And the NFL Communications Director, Joe Lockhart, who happened to be President Clinton's press secretary back in the 1990s, said this morning in a conference call, quote, everyone should know, including the president, that this is what real locker room talk is. In the middle of his feud with the NFL, the president also, as you mentioned, Heather, reconfigured his travel ban. 8 countries are now covered by it. Some of them came off the list. Some went on the list. That includes Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iran, and Somalia. They're from the original list, but also adds Chad, North Korea, and some people from Venezuela. The difference with this new list is there's no expiration date, and all of these countries have individually tailored restrictions. The president tweeting out this morning the necessity for keeping the travel ban in place and making changes, saying, quote, making America safe is my #1 priority. We will not admit those into our country we cannot safely vet. But the ACLU already challenging this, saying, quote, the administration's order is still a Muslim ban. President Trump's original sin of targeting Muslims cannot be cured by throwing other countries onto his enemies list. The Supreme Court oral arguments for the original travel ban happen on October the 10th, Heather, so it's likely this is going to be in the news for some time to come.
Yeah, very busy week on tap. John Roberts, live for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now for more on the fallout from the president's comments on the NFL and the national anthem controversy, let's bring in Bret Baier, the anchor of Special Report. It's kind of interesting to me, Bret, because, the controversy over Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, that's kind of where this all started, had pretty well died down. And then the president found a way to dredge it up in his speech on Friday. I guess the question is why?
Well, that is a good question. I think there were 6 kneeling protests before Friday. Then the speech Friday and the tweets that followed, there were 200 plus, as you just heard from John Roberts, over the weekend. in the NFL. Obviously, that has supercharged a very emotional issue, and people are on both sides of this issue. The people who are kneeling say it's their right because of free speech to do that. There are many people who are, in the middle of the country say, why are they doing that? And they don't see the connection with these football players on this issue. I think the president clearly has stirred this up, and it is an emotional discussion. What we're not discussing is that he may likely lose in Senate primary in Alabama. It looks like it's an uphill battle for Luther Strange there. We'll see. We're not talking about the fact that the health care repeal and replace bill is probably on life support in the Senate. And we're not talking about the troubles that North Korea is just in the past hour putting out there. So it's an interesting dichotomy to be talking about all of this that has been stirred up in the past 3 days.
But even some of his most ardent supporters have said that they disagree with him on this one. Rex Ryan, former NFL coach who is a big Trump fan, says he doesn't like what the president had to say.
Well, clearly, John, I think that the SOB part of the speech was part that went over the line for some folks, and I think that where his supporters are, that was the moment that they kind of broke off and said that was not the right kind of terminology to be using. The issue itself about whether teams should allow the kneeling or the back and forth is one issue, but how the president characterized it in that speech in Alabama, I think, is another.
The New York Times quotes Christopher Ruddy, the head of Newsmax, as saying, "I don't think his intention is to be divisive. He wants to be viewed as strong, but also someone who speaks the truth as he sees it and not afraid what the establishment says about it. He enjoys a fight and a challenge, so that may play into some of this." Enjoying a fight and a challenge is one thing, but there ought to be a goal at the end of it, and a lot of people are mystified as to what the president's goal is here.
He knows when he says something what's going to get attention and what isn't. He knows by adding Rocket Man to the sentence in the UN speech that soundbite is going to get attention. He knows by using SOBs that moment is going to get a news cycle. He is the ultimate marketer. Sometimes the motivation behind it, why he's doing that, is in question. And I think it has created this divisive moment where it's definitely a conversation around kitchen tables around America and at water coolers and coffee shops. But does it come to a resolution? We'll see.
It does distract from the GOP efforts to try to replace Obamacare, as you said earlier. Senators Cassidy and Graham, who have introduced the legislation, are releasing a revised version of their bill. It sends more health care dollars to the states of a couple of key holdout Republicans ahead of a move to vote on the legislation this week before the protections against a Democratic filibuster are set to expire. Does the idea of sending more money to Alaska and Maine to perhaps sweeten the pot for Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, how's that going to fly on Capitol Hill?
I can't imagine that Rand Paul is going to be persuaded to vote yes if there's more money going out the door. His problem was that the taxes of Obamacare are still in place and distributing money differently. I doubt that Susan Collins is going to move off her no. Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, possibly. And then you just have John McCain, who has said he's a no already. If you do the math, they're probably one short, and that's what we saw last time. If there is a loss here, it is going to be a big loss as far as looking forward to tax reform and trying to get that across the finish line. So far, the GOP has been dysfunctional in being able to get big pieces of legislation through.
And when Democrats were originally trying to pass Obamacare, Republicans were hugely critical of what they called the Cornhusker kickback and the Louisiana Purchase, offering more money to those states who at the time were represented by influential Democratic senators.
This is how Washington has always worked. It's much more present because of not only our coverage 24/7, but social media and the like. These bills are out there. You can see them. But this is how the horse trading has always happened up on Capitol Hill.
All right, Bret Baier, we'll let you get back to watching some of the horse trading. See you tonight on Special Report. Thanks, Bret.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, apparently, according to the Associated Press, Rand Paul does say, as expected, he is still a no, even with the revisions to the health care bill. Well, disgraced former Congressman Anthony Weiner, meantime, in federal court today, where he was sentenced to almost 2 years in prison for sexting with a 15-year-old girl. A live report from the courthouse. Also, Maria, still a hurricane moving north in the Atlantic. Now North Carolina's coastline could be the storm's next target. Plus, more on the fatal church shooting in Tennessee and the man that police believe and several witnesses are calling a hero.
I heard something sound like fireworks, and then it went off again, getting closer. I said, that's a gun. And I'm seeing my son's face just covered in blood.
Welcome back. A Fox News alert for you. A hero emerges from a fatal shooting at a church in Tennessee that left 1 woman dead and 7 others injured. Police now say that an usher at the church confronted that gunman. Jonathan Seary joins us live from Antioch, Tennessee with those details. Jonathan, what do we know, first of all, about this hero?
Yeah, he's just 22 years old. Robert Caleb Engel, a longtime parishioner here at the church, serving most recently as an usher. Police are saying that he's a hero, but Engel says that it was the police, the first responders, the medical staff treating him and the other injured parishioners who are the real heroes. But ultimately, it was Engel who confronted this suspect during the shooting spree. Police say the gunman pistol whipped the usher, but during that scuffle, the suspect's gun went off, injuring the suspect, and that is what effectively ended the shooting spree. While being treated at the hospital, Engel issued a statement saying, I ask everyone to pray for the victims, family members of the victims, our church community. Please pray for healing. Also, please pray for the shooter's family and friends. They are hurting as well. The suspect, 25-year-old Emmanuel Sampson, has been released from the hospital and is now in police custody. He faces 1 murder charge in connection with the death of 39-year-old Melanie Smith, also known to parishioners as Melanie Crow. She was fatally shot in the church parking lot before the gunman allegedly went inside the church sanctuary, opening fire and injuring 6 others. Authorities say more charges are pending, Heather.
And from what I understand, the usher had a gun that he had registered, went out to his car, got the gun, and then came back inside. Do police have a motive at all?
Yeah, police say they're investigating several leads. In the meantime, the FBI has launched a civil rights investigation into this shooting spree. Church members say the suspect was no stranger to them. He had actually attended services at Burnett Chapel Church of Christ a few years ago, but had not been there recently. A man who lives across the street from the church says the congregation is racially diverse and welcomes everyone.
Why do you do something like that to good, innocent people? Leaves in there praying to their Lord. You don't bother anybody in there praying in the Lord's house.
And investigators say Sampson has admitted to shooting at this church. They say that they have recovered a total of 4 weapons, 2 inside the church sanctuary and 2 inside the suspect's SUV out in the church parking lot. Heather, back to you.
Yeah, when that usher pistol whipped him, he shot himself in the leg. Jonathan Seary, live for us. Thank you.
Well, NFL teams taking a stand against President Trump. Players across the country, arm in arm and on their knees during the playing of our national anthem on Sunday. Our media panel weighs in on the controversy. Plus, a humanitarian crisis growing in Puerto Rico as officials keep a close eye on a damaged dam. Is it at risk of collapse? Also, an outpouring of aid and support is arriving. More on that ahead.
My cousin and I and our family still haven't been able to hear from all of our family over there, and we are concerned for them and for everyone on the island. Given the loss and devastation, we need to pay attention and to urgently support Puerto Rico and the Caribbean with donations.
Fox News alert for you on the crisis in Puerto Rico, with the scale of devastation becoming more apparent days after a Cat 4 hurricane smashed into the island. As several hospitals are completely flooded, they're dependent on diesel generators to keep patients alive. And while millions are still without water, power, phone service, all of this after a storm that set Puerto Rico back decades. Garrett Tenney's live for us from San Juan with more on the recovery efforts there. Garrett?
Yeah, and Heather, I was just talking with some of the folks who live here in Old San Juan, and there is growing frustration that they are not getting the help that they need. Basic necessities like food, water, and fuel, they are still severely lacking. Power is still out for most of the island, and that is causing some real issues for folks. You need gasoline to be able to run generators, and there's not a lot of generators on the island, but those that have them, that's how they are able to cook, run fans, be able to cook and clean as well around their homes as they try to get this recovery effort underway. There are long lines for just about everything, and you can see these lines, folks have been waiting as long as 9 hours just to fill up on $10 worth of gas. And these lines, they will stretch for as long as a mile or more just to fill up on that little bit of gas. Now, across the territory, there is a severe lack of the water, the food, and just the help to be able to clear roads and debris from people's homes were destroyed. That's what folks are looking for. I spoke with the governor earlier this morning, and he said help is on the way. It is being delayed, though, because of those gasoline shortages. They can't get trucks out to help clear the roads. A lot of parts of the island they still can't get out to see just how bad the damage is. And earlier on Fox and Friends, he laid out just what Puerto Rico is facing going forward.
The magnitude of this devastation is unprecedented. I mean, everywhere in the island there is devastation, and the infrastructure has been severely damaged. It's going to be an unprecedented and unfolding events that are going to be occurring with energy, telecoms, and water, and so forth.
Yeah, and you're also seeing long lines at banks and ATMs. Now, folks are looking for cash because without power, credit cards aren't working. A lot of ATMs, they are clear out of cash now. Several banks have reopened this morning. Long lines at those as well. Folks here saying to get to some of those banks, it's as far as 10 miles. So when you're having to decide between spending all day waiting in a line for water, food, cash, and gasoline, that is a tough spot for folks to be in. Another thing with it, officials are still monitoring is that dam in western Puerto Rico that they still say is on the verge of collapsing. This morning, the governor met with several engineers, and he said he will be giving an update on the status of that dam where they've evacuated more than 7,000 people who are at risk downstream. This afternoon, they're going to give an update on that in a press conference around 2:30. Heather.
Let's hope that holds. Garrett Tenney live for us from San Juan. Thank you. And of course, we are tracking Maria's path with a tropical storm warning issued for much of the North Carolina coast as the storm continues to weaken, thankfully. A mandatory evacuation order is already in place in parts of that region. Maria will move slowly to the north through early Wednesday when it should be a tropical storm and then turn eastward, we're told, out to sea and away from the U.S. finally. But as it moves, other parts of the East Coast could be on guard, or should be, for large swells, heavy surf, and rip currents.
Well, I think the owners should do something about it. I think it's very disrespectful to our flag and to our country. So I certainly think the owners should do something about it. There was great solidarity. I watched a little bit. I was not watching the games today. Believe me, I'm doing other things. But I watched a little bit, and I will say that there was tremendous solidarity for our flag and for our country.
President Trump standing on the tarmac and standing his ground, saying the NFL should change its policy. The controversy mushroomed into a major story as NFL players and owners united on Sunday after the president said players who protest during the national anthem should be fired. On Twitter this morning, Mr. Trump said the issue is not about race, but about, quote, respect for our country. This comes on the day after nearly 200 NFL players stayed on their knees during the playing of the national anthem. Some teams didn't even emerge from the locker room. Joining us, Joe Concha, media reporter for The Hill. Also, Judy Miller, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, author, and Fox News contributor. Welcome to both of you. Joe, you say this is a tale of two bubbles, the media bubble and then the other bubble.
Yeah, I've been known to frequent a couple of sports bars on Sundays, John. I have a fantasy football addiction. I'm willing to admit that on national television. And I was out and about all day yesterday just speaking to regular folks around New Jersey, talking about this controversy. It was all people were talking about. And I can tell you a decided majority agree with the president on this one. They don't disagree with the right to protest. Who disagrees with that? They disagree with the venue it's being done in terms of during the national anthem. They see that as disrespectful to the flag and disrespectful to veterans. And look, this isn't just sentiment that I'm gathering now. Ratings are in. You know, I like breaking ratings news on this particular segment. And last night's game between the Redskins and Raiders, that was an NBC Sunday night game, the big platform, the top-rated TV show every week, down 10% from the same week last year, down nearly 10% from the week before. This is having a palpable effect, and the sentiment on the ground is not matching what we're seeing from the pundit class in the media bubbles, John, where all day yesterday it was widespread condemnation.
This Twitter storm is the result of a very calculated decision by the president to change the political subject. He doesn't want to talk about the impending failure to repeal Obamacare or his childish and very dangerous war of words with the North Korean dictator. And in calling players a name that many of us feel uncomfortable using on the air, he is dividing the country yet again and diverting attention from his disappointments at home and abroad. But I must say, if I wasn't, unlike you, Joe, in a sports bar, but I do have a copy of the...
My condolences.
Yeah, but no, not for me. I do have a copy of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights on my desk, and I'm telling you that what was going on here was an amazing display of players coming together and making a peaceful protest in favor of an issue that they feel strongly about. And let me point out something else. Yes, I know it was disrespectful to the flag. I have a flag signed by all the members of the Iraqi unit, the Americans with whom I was embedded in the war. It means a lot to me. But much more important is the republic for which it stands. And the republic for which it stands is built on a pillar of free speech and expression, and peacefully done. These guys aren't Antifa. They're not out there with their clubs and their black masks beating people who disagree with them. They are making the most American of protests in the place where they feel it will get attention. I just think the president's trying to divide us, and we should overlook it and move on.
Worth pointing out that about 1 in 8 NFL players took a knee yesterday. It wasn't certainly a league-wide thing. But I do want to point out Alejandro Villanueva from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He played football at West Point, went on to be an Army Ranger, and then came back after his term of service was up and joined the National Football League. He was basically the only Steeler who was out there. He was at the entrance of the tunnel, not only for the anthem, but singing along with it. And, you know, he took heat from his coach for that. His coach said, hey, you know, stand up for our team. That's more important to me than standing up for the anthem, essentially. I'm paraphrasing.
And, John, you'll never believe what one of the top-selling jerseys are right now in the NFL. It's the gentleman that you're looking at that defied his team in honor of his country because he served it. And, look, Joe Lockhart you played this, or you showed this tweet at the top of this segment. Joe Lockhart is a spokesman for the NFL. He used to be a spokesperson for President Bill Clinton. And he said to the president, hey, Mr. President, this is what real locker room talk sounds like, because everybody has to snark instead of just responding professionally. And the NFL really needs to start being consistent, John, because last year the Dallas Cowboys wanted to wear a logo, a decal of the Dallas Police Department after several police officers were killed actually protecting protesters in Dallas. And the NFL said, no, we don't agree with that free speech. And when D'Angelo Williams wanted to wear pink cleats all season long to honor his mother who died of breast cancer, the NFL said, no, you have to do it during the designated month that we say you can, and that's in October. So the NFL wants to talk about free speech. Better start getting consistent, guys.
We're going to have to leave it there. Great discussion. Joe Concha, Judy Miller, thank you both.
Thank you,
Joe.
Well, Judy briefly mentioned this, the war of words escalating between President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un as our military takes to the skies in a show of force in the Pacific. Plus, Free Speech Week seems like a perfect fit for one of the most liberal universities in the country, but this event was supposed to feature stars of the conservative movement. So what happened to it, and what the founder is vowing to do now?
People like Milo come out and they destroy the concept of political correctness, which is what we need to do in this country if we're to restore free speech and intellectual diversity and be able to have open and honest intellectual discourse.
Fox News alert for you. President Trump in another war of words with North Korea, taking to Twitter to send a strong warning to Kim Jong-un and his regime, saying, quote, just heard Foreign Minister of North Korea speaking at UN. If he echoes thoughts of Little Rocket Man, they won't be around much longer. In a show of force, U.S. bombers escorted by fighter jets flew close to North Korea's east coast over the weekend. Now, the regime's foreign minister is now firing back. This just in, saying that it reserves the right to shoot down U.S. bombers in international airspace after what they're calling President Trump's declaration of war. And with us now to discuss it is Andrew Peek. He's a former U.S. Army intelligence officer and a fellow at the Clements Center for National Security.
Well, I think they feel incredibly isolated. You know, I think the president's rhetoric has backed them into a corner diplomatically with China, their main backer. I think genuinely they believe that a U.S. strike on their nuclear facilities is possible. And in previous administrations, I don't think they've thought that was a possibility. And that's good. That's good for us. That's good for the president. I thought it was interesting that they referenced bombers, right? That's what indicates to me that they think someone's coming after militarily their nuclear facilities, because they could easily say we're going to target the U.S. and its allies. It's attacked South Korea in the past before. Yeah. Or it could say we're going to target U.S. warships, which are just offshore in the Sea of Japan. And then obviously this follows some action over the weekend, from what I understand, that these the U.S. flew some bombers along with fighter escorts, and it was the farthest point north of the Korean demilitarized zone by any such American aircraft this century. What is the significance of that? Well, I think in addition to the rhetoric you are hearing out of the White House and the tough talk from Nikki Haley and General McMaster at the National Security Council, they are rebuilding America's deterrence. You know, the logic of military deterrence is the other fellow steps more carefully if they think you are more likely to act. And thus going on these high-altitude bombing practices, these practice runs for approaches to North Korea, as far north as they've ever been before, I think is a genuine part of making the North think that military options are on the table. And they were also not accompanied by South Korea or Japanese planes either. Let's take a look at this poll. People were asked, do you favor or oppose military action in North Korea if U.S. does not accomplish goals via economic or diplomatic efforts? And 58% of people polled, they are in favor. Do you think that they really understand what that means, and what does it mean? Well, I think it means that people don't want business as usual with North Korea, that we've done an effective job of raising to the point where we don't want another kick the can down the road nuclear deal that will say, okay, here's a bunch of financial and economic rewards for you in exchange for no actual concessions. I think above all, it means Americans don't necessarily want war, but they trust the president to deal with this issue. All right. Andrew Peek joining us with his insight. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Heather.
Breaking now, Free Speech Week at UC Berkeley. An event at the liberal university was supposed to feature shining stars from the conservative movement, but it seems to be over before it ever began. Claudia Cowan live for us in Berkeley. Claudia.
Well, good morning, John. After all the hype, Free Speech Week fizzled into a photo op for right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos and another expensive protest for UC Berkeley. Hundreds of officers were called in from 8 different law enforcement agencies, even though the 4-day event, promising a who's who of conservative speakers, was a bust. The student group sponsoring Free Speech Week canceled it on Saturday, citing safety concerns. But Milo, well, he came anyway, holding court in the main quad here for about about half an hour before a small group of supporters. Many more people wanted to see him, but the single metal detector and intense individual screening meant just a few dozen people made it inside. Because the event wasn't sponsored, there was no sound system and so no speech. Instead, Milo signed autographs, took selfies, and made his point.
It was very important that we show up on campus. It was very important that we made ourselves present, despite the machinations of the university to subvert and to shatter their students' aspirations. But we're going to be back. We're going to be back next April, and I'm going to keep coming to UC Berkeley until they start treating their conservative students with the same respect.
He says he was whisked away after being told Antifa was showing up. Those were the masked rioters who caused so much damage when he came here to speak back in February. But there was no sign of Antifa, no violence, and only a few arrests, about 11. Price tag for all the security, $800,000, but university officials say the event had become very chaotic and they